There is a particular horror reserved for cases involving children. Not children as victims, though that is horror enough, but children as defendants, as the accused, as the people sitting at the table where adults are supposed to sit, in a system designed by adults, for adults, that processes them with the same machinery regardless. Marcus Webb, and I am using a different Marcus for this story, a real type of case that has repeated itself across decades of American juvenile justice, was 16 years old when he was arrested. He was 17 when he was tried. He was 17 when he was sentenced. And he was 35 when he walked out of a Georgia state prison having served 18 years for a murder that a DNA test confirmed he could not have committed. His name, in our story, is Elijah Carter. He grew up in Savannah, Georgia, the son of a single mother who worked 2 jobs and a grandmother who provided the stability that 2 jobs leave no time for. He was, by all accounts, a normal 16-year-old, not a saint, not a scholar, but a boy who liked basketball and was worried about his maths grade and had not yet figured out what he wanted to do with his life. He had not figured that out by the time they took him away. He figured it out eventually inside, but that is getting ahead of ourselves. This is the story of what happens when the American juvenile justice system decides a boy is a man before he has had the chance to become one, and of what happens when, 20 years later, the science proves it was wrong. Savannah, Georgia in 1999 was a city in the process of becoming. The historic district was drawing tourists and money. The waterfront was being restored. But the neighborhoods away from that postcard version of the city, the neighborhoods where Elijah Carter grew up, had not yet felt those changes. Elijah lived with his mother, Diane, and his grandmother, Ruth, in a 3-room apartment on the east side of the city. Diane worked mornings at a dry cleaning business and evenings at a supermarket checkout. Ruth had arthritis that was getting worse, but did not prevent her from making dinner every evening and checking Elijah's homework every night. Elijah was a B- student. He was not in trouble. No arrests, no suspensions. One minor incident at school 2 years earlier involving a fight that the school had handled internally. He had 4 close friends, all boys his age, all from the same neighborhood. He played basketball every afternoon at the court 2 blocks from his apartment. He wanted vaguely to be a mechanic. On the night of September 4th, 1999, a 22-year-old man named Deshaun Morris was shot and killed in an alley 3 streets from Elijah's apartment. Deshaun was known in the neighborhood, not well, not as a friend of Elijah's, but as a young man whose name circulated in ways that suggested his life had gone in directions that Elijah's so far had not. Elijah said he had been at his grandmother's apartment that evening, watching television. Ruth confirmed this. But Ruth was his grandmother, and the police and prosecution would treat her confirmation with the specific skepticism reserved for family members whose testimony happens to provide inconvenient alibis. What the police had, what they would build everything on, was a witness. A 19-year-old man named Terrence Boyle, who told detectives he had been in the alley that night and had seen Elijah Carter shoot Deshaun Morris. Terrence Boyle was 19 years old in September 1999. He had a criminal record, 2 prior arrests, 1 conviction for possession with intent to distribute, and he was, at the time of Deshaun Morris's murder, facing a potential 3rd arrest on unrelated charges. The detectives investigating Deshaun's murder interviewed Terrence 3 days after the shooting. He initially said he had not been in the alley that night. When the detectives explained the nature and seriousness of the charges he was personally facing, the kind of conversation that is technically a voluntary interview and practically something else, Terrence's memory improved. He said he had been in the alley. He said he had seen a young man he knew from the neighborhood. He said the young man's name was Elijah Carter. He said Elijah had been arguing with Deshaun. He said Elijah had produced a weapon. He said he had run before the shot was fired, but had heard it. There was no other eyewitness. There was no weapon recovered. There was no physical evidence placing Elijah at the scene. There was no DNA evidence. There was a 16-year-old boy's grandmother saying he had been home watching television, and a 19-year-old man with charges pending saying he had seen him commit murder. The detectives charged Elijah Carter. What neither the detectives nor the prosecution nor the defense nor the jury knew, what would not become known for nearly 2 decades, was that Terrence Boyle had not been in that alley. He had been at a house party 4 blocks away, which 30 people could confirm. He had identified Elijah Carter because he knew him from the neighborhood. He had identified him because the detectives had made his cooperation feel like the path of least resistance. And he had identified him because he was 19 years old with charges pending and he had made a choice that was terrible and easy in equal measure. He would live with that choice for 19 years before he told the truth. The decision to try Elijah Carter as an adult was made by the Chatham County District Attorney's Office. Under Georgia law at the time, the decision to transfer a juvenile to adult court was within prosecutorial discretion for certain categories of offense. Murder was one of them. The argument for adult transfer was that the alleged crime was serious and that the community's interest in accountability required the full weight of the adult system. The argument against was that Elijah Carter was 16 years old, had no prior criminal record of any kind, and that the evidence against him consisted entirely of the testimony of a single witness with personal reasons to cooperate with the prosecution. The transfer was granted. Elijah Carter would be tried as an adult. His public defender was a 31-year-old attorney named Michael Torres who was carrying 42 active cases. He spent 11 hours on Elijah's defense preparation, 11 hours for a murder trial that would determine the rest of a 16-year-old's life. He challenged Terrence Boyle's testimony. He presented Ruth Carter's alibi evidence. He noted the complete absence of physical evidence. He did not have the resources, the time, or the investigative support to do what the case required, to find out where Terrence Boyle actually was on the night of September 4th, to locate the 30 people at the house party 4 blocks away, to build the counter-narrative that would have shown the jury that the prosecution's only witness was lying. The trial lasted 6 days. The jury deliberated for one. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Elijah Carter was 17 years old, 1 month past his birthday, when the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. His mother Diane fainted in the courtroom. His grandmother Ruth stood up and said, in a voice that every person in that room heard, "My grandson is innocent. Every one of you will know that before this is over." The bailiff asked her to sit down. She sat, but she did not stop saying it. Elijah Carter entered the Georgia State prison system at 17 years old. He was placed in an adult facility, consistent with his adult conviction, and he spent the first 3 years learning, with the specific urgency of a teenager in a dangerous environment, how to survive. He grew up in prison. This is not a metaphor. He was 17 when he entered. He learned to shave in prison. He learned to cook in prison. He had his first serious conversations about the future, about what a life could look like, in prison. He formed his understanding of who he was, and who he wanted to be inside concrete walls and under fluorescent lights. His grandmother Ruth visited every 2 weeks for 14 years. She was in her late 60s when he was convicted and her health declined as the years passed, but she came every fortnight without exception until 2014, when a stroke left her unable to travel. She died in 2016, still waiting for the word she had promised would come. Elijah's mother Diane visited monthly. She had quit one of her 2 jobs to have more time, to have the energy for the visits, for the legal correspondence, for the endless paperwork of fighting a conviction. She had, over the years, contacted every legal organization she could find, written to journalists, and filed complaints with the Georgia State Bar about the quality of Elijah's original defense. Elijah studied. He completed his GED in 2002. He then completed an associate's degree in business administration in 2006. He began studying law informally, reading every case he could find about wrongful conviction, about witness testimony, about the evidentiary standards that had sent him here and might one day take him out. He became, over 15 years, the most knowledgeable inmate in his facility about his own case. He knew the trial transcript almost by heart. He knew the weaknesses. He knew what had not been done. What he did not know, what he had no way of knowing, was what Terrence Boyle was doing with his conscience. Terrence Boyle was 38 years old in 2018 when his daughter asked him a question he was not prepared for. She was 16, the same age Elijah Carter had been when Terrence's lie sent him to prison. She was doing a school project on the criminal justice system. She had been reading about wrongful convictions. She had found, in the course of her research, a reference to Elijah Carter's case, one of several cases that a Georgia legal advocacy group had flagged as potentially problematic. She asked her father, "Do you know anything about this case? It happened near where you grew up." Terrence said he did not know anything about it. He did not sleep that night. He did not sleep well for the 3 months that followed. He had not slept well, in the deepest sense, for 19 years. But that question, asked by his 16-year-old daughter with her mother's directness and her own complete innocence of the answer, made the insomnia acute in a way he could no longer manage. He spoke to a pastor first, then a lawyer. The lawyer told him clearly, "If you come forward, you will face serious legal consequences for perjury and potentially for obstruction of justice. But the man you testified against has now served 18 years. His grandmother died waiting for his exoneration. His mother has spent 18 years fighting." Terrence said, "Tell me what I need to do." In March 2018, Terrence Boyle provided a sworn affidavit to the Georgia Innocence Project detailing everything. The lie, the detective's pressure, the charges he had been facing. The party 4 blocks away where 30 people had seen him that night. He named names. He provided dates. He explained in precise and painful detail what he had done and why, and what it had cost a boy who had done nothing. He said, at the end of the affidavit, "I do not expect Elijah Carter to forgive me. I am not asking for that. I am asking for the record to be corrected. He did not do this. I am the only person who can say that with certainty, and I am finally saying it." The Georgia Innocence Project moved quickly on Terrence's affidavit. They combined it with a motion for DNA testing of the physical evidence that had been collected from the crime scene in 1999, evidence that had never been tested because in 2000, with a single eyewitness providing what seemed like a clear identification, the prosecution had not needed it. The DNA results came back in November 2018. The biological material recovered from the scene, from Deshaun Morris and from the immediate area of the shooting, did not match Elijah Carter. There was a second DNA profile present that matched no one in the existing database. Combined with Terrence Boyle's affidavit, the alibi witnesses he had named, 27 of whom were still contactable and confirmed they had seen him at the party that night, and the DNA exclusion, the Georgia courts moved with unusual speed. In February 2019, the Chatham County Superior Court vacated Elijah Carter's conviction. The prosecution declined to retry. The charges were dismissed in April 2019. Elijah Carter walked out of the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison on a warm April morning. He was 35 years old. He had been 16 when they took him in. He had been inside for 18 years. His mother Diane was there. She was 56 years old. She had worked 2 jobs for most of the last 18 years. She had written letters and filed complaints and contacted lawyers and never stopped. She ran across the car park when she saw him emerge. She ran the way people run when they have been waiting longer than most people wait for anything. They stood in the car park together for a long time. There was nothing to say that the standing didn't already say. Terrence Boyle was charged with perjury in June 2019. He pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, suspended, with 3 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. He served no prison time. The detective who had interviewed him in 1999, who had conducted an interview that produced a statement from a frightened 19-year-old with charges pending, was never investigated. The specific conversation that had preceded Terrence's identification was never formally reviewed. The detective had retired in 2014. The public defender who had spent 11 hours preparing a murder defense for a 16-year-old was never disciplined by the Georgia State Bar. 11 hours is not a violation of the bar's standards. It is a violation of the implicit promise of the phrase, adequate legal representation. But that phrase has no enforceable minimum. Elijah Carter received compensation from the state of Georgia, $50,000 per year, amounting to $900,000 for 18 years. He filed civil lawsuits that were eventually settled for additional undisclosed amounts. He is 39 years old now. He lives in Atlanta. He became the mechanic he had vaguely wanted to be at 16, runs a small auto repair shop that he bought with part of his compensation. He employs 4 people. He is known by his customers as thorough, precise, and fair. He and Terrence Boyle have not met. Elijah has said in one interview that he does not wish to meet him. He said, "I understand why he did what he did. I was 16. He was 19. We were both in a system that was using us. I understand it, but understanding it is as far as I'm going." He was asked what he wants people to know about his case. He thought for a moment. Then he said, "I was 16. I want people to remember that. When you put a 16-year-old in an adult courtroom and an adult prison, when you run a child through the adult system, because it is legally permissible and administratively easier, you are making a decision about that child's life that will last longer than childhood. You are making a decision that lasts forever." He paused. Then he said, "I was not a man when they made that decision. I became one inside. But becoming one inside is not the same as becoming one in the world. And that difference, that specific difference, is what 18 years looks like when you are carrying it. His grandmother never got to hear those words. She died in 2016, 3 years before he came home. He visits her grave on the anniversary of her death and on his birthday. He brings flowers. He does not stay long. He says what he needs to say, and he leaves, because he learned from her that you say what needs to be said, and then you keep moving. He is still keeping moving.